listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. And I want to emphasize today that definitions of infidelity vary a lot, and I'm here for all of it. People have very different understandings of what infidelity means, and no matter what your infidelity situation looks like, I'm here to help you figure out what you want to do with it or about it. And my agenda is to help you determine what's truly right for you. I'm not here to shove a bunch of prescriptive advice down your throat or tell you what you should do or you have to do. In the realm of infidelity, there is a lot of that kind of advice out there, but that is not what I'm about. So if you're ready to talk about your infidelity situation and find relief from the things that are troubling you, let's talk. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. On similar lines or along similar lines, I was talking to my spouse recently, and I can't remember exactly how it came up, but he said something to the effect of like, does something count as an affair if you don't have sex? Or like, is it really an affair if you don't have sex? And I said, I was a little surprised, but I said, well, actually a lot of people have experiences that they consider affairs that don't include sex or even physical contact necessarily. And my spouse's mind was blown. He had no idea what I was talking about. And then I went on to introduce him to the concept of an emotional affair. And that really blew his mind too. And I told him that some people have experiences that they define as affairs that are conducted completely online or over the phone and don't ever entail meeting their affair partner in person. And, he was kind of thrown off by all of this. And although this anecdote can illustrate a great many different things, such as the extent to which my spouse and I talk about my work, the point that I want you to take away from this is that people have really different understandings of what infidelity means and what it entails or what it could entail or what it could include or what counts as infidelity. And on the subject of emotional affairs, some of you are deep in the midst of one right now. And some of you who are listening might have never even heard the term emotional affair before today. And that brings me to my next point, which is that part of the reason why I shared this little anecdote is because it prompted me to think about the extent to which I talk about the diversity of infidelity experiences on this podcast. And more to the point, it prompted me to reflect on how I don't do a great job of talking about how diverse experiences of infidelity can be. And I wanted to at least acknowledge this limitation, even if I don't end up remedying it in one fell swoop. I know I refer to a pretty limited range of examples of infidelity situations to illustrate the concepts that I'm talking about pretty regularly. And although I can't promise that I'm going to stop doing that, I definitely want to say that I'm aware of this limitation. And I also want you to know that even if I don't demonstrate it as well as I could, I am very attuned to the fact that there's a wide variety of experiences that people count as infidelity or consider infidelity, right? And as I'm saying this, of course, I'm like, gosh, I really do want to do a better job of representing this breadth of experiences on this show. So that's something for me to work on. But in the meantime, today we are going to talk about disruption. Sometimes things happen in life that constitute pretty major upheavals, or could be reasonably considered pretty major upheavals. And sometimes these experiences are the result of broader events, social or natural, that may impact many people at once. And sometimes these kinds of experiences are very personal to us. So for instance, If there's a war or there's a major natural disaster, it may be that our home is destroyed. And that may also happen to everyone who lives near us. Or if our family structure changes, we may end up leaving a dwelling that we have considered home for a long, long time. And although the physical structure of our home may not literally be destroyed, our experience of home or our sense of what and where home is may undergo a radical adjustment. And of course, there are plenty of other life events that can count as a major upheaval. And sometimes when we're in the midst of a major upheaval, it can seem like pretty much everything in our lives is in a state of upheaval at once. And many of us don't like that. Many of us don't like upheaval. Many of us don't like disruptions of major aspects of our internal or external worlds. And as the title of this episode suggests, many of us consider any kind of disruption or upheaval to be a form of bad shit happening to us, or to fall into the category of bad shit happening to us, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. We may recognize that changes in our lives could be beneficial or might even be extremely necessary. And yet we may still consider upheaval and disruption and change to be something that we ought to avoid or resist at all costs. So, of course, here I'm going to return to one of my classic examples. Many people resist the idea of seriously contemplating divorce or separating from a long-term partner, even if they have been deeply unhappy in their marriage or their relationship for a significant amount of time. The fear of the total life shakeup that divorce might likely bring keeps a lot of people tolerating, or at least trying to tolerate, familiar forms of discomfort. And of course, that's something that I've talked about. That's a kind of situation that I've talked about from many angles on this podcast in the past. But this week, I want to talk about major life upheavals from the perspective of the tarot or tarot cards. And the most immediate reason why I'm doing this is because in the recent, I think it was the very last episode with Jessie Susanna, the Money Witch, she mentioned the Tower card, and we didn't really dig into the meaning of that card during the conversation we had. And I want to clarify what we were talking about for anyone who might have been wondering. But in addition to that, I've been thinking about talking about the Tower card in some depth and detail on an episode here for a long time. So that interview with the Money Witch just provided a good nudge for me to do so. Tarot cards, if you're not familiar with them, are illustrated representations of universal or archetypal aspects of the human experience. Some people consider the tarot a map of human consciousness or a symbolic representation of internal and external aspects of the human life journey. The tarot consists of 22 major arcana cards, which represent, as the name suggests, the more major aspects of universal aspects of the human experience, and 56 cards in the minor arcana, which represent the less major but still important challenges and opportunities that humans face. And you may have heard of tarot cards before, or you may be very familiar with them. And the tarot is used in many ways. But the reason why I'm talking about them right now is because they've been recognized as representing common, timeless, universal aspects of the human experience for a very long time and across many different cultures. So, the point is, like, there are some messages in these representations of the human experience that have struck a chord with people across time and place. And therefore, I think they have some important and useful things to show us. Some of the experience, and to that effect, some of the experiences the tarot recognizes as universal are not entirely easy or fun or unchallenging. And I think it can be really helpful to recognize that the tarot and other systems for symbolizing and giving tools for interpreting the human experience that have been around for hundreds of years have recognized that human growth and evolution can take some monumental twists and turns. And sometimes growth and evolution feels really good and invigorating and exciting. And sometimes it feels like you're going to die. And I point this out because there are so many interesting ideas out there about how life is supposed to go. And although not everyone shares these ideas, of course, I think they're common enough to be worth mentioning. Specifically, a lot of people out there believe that there's such a thing as an ideal professional trajectory to be had. We figure out what we want to do for work and what we want to be when we grow up. And then we begin working towards admission to the institutions that will train us to do this kind of work and give us the credentials to do so. And of course, the more prestigious the institutions, the better. And then the idea is that we'll excel within our training and then move on into gaining full employment in our chosen fields. And we'll gain increasingly prestigious and well-paid jobs, and we'll advance and we'll gain recognition and, make a lot of money and retire and have a boat and live happily ever after, right? And when it comes to love and relationships, there are so many dominant narratives out there of meeting someone and falling in love and then formalizing a commitment to them and probably having a family in there too, and then living happily ever after. And we could talk a lot about the idealized heteronormative life course and how this fits into that, but we'll save that for another time. For now, the broad point that I'm making is that probably especially in our advanced capitalist societies, we tend to want this linear life path towards better and better things. We tend to want to be on this linear upward trajectory. Now, on the one hand, I think it's great to be clear on what you want to experience in life and to work towards those things. But I also think that it's incredibly important to understand that our journey doesn't need to be about making things perfect and then keeping them that way. We're creating some idealized life for ourselves and sticking with it, even if we get to a point when we realize that we desperately want to depart from the path we embarked upon. And the Tarot helps normalize the idea that maybe life has some twists and turns within it for us all. I think that it can help normalize the idea that the human experience can be one hell of a journey, which doesn't necessarily have to be fit for the Hallmark Channel. Does the Hallmark Channel even exist anymore? I have no idea. I know it used to be a thing, but maybe it passed into extinction years ago. And maybe some people listening to this don't even know what I'm talking about because it's been dead for longer than I even realized. Anyway, one of the major arcana tarot cards, which represents one of the universal major elements of the human experience, is called the Tower. And this card is sometimes considered to be a scary one. And although the specifics of what this card looks like varies from tarot deck to tarot deck, there are many different tarot decks out there with many different styles of illustration. The image is basically of a tower crumbling to the ground and all of its occupants being flung out of the windows or the turrets or whatever they're called and being forced into a free fall of some sort. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, some interpretations of the tarot suggest that the Tower card is every bit as scary as it seems or looks, and that it actually represents misfortune. But the more prevalent interpretations of the Tower card, and I believe the more appropriate and useful interpretations of the Tower card, speak to it as a symbol of opportunity for restructuring and renewal. The anthropologist Angelus Arian considers the Tower card to be, quote, a symbol of the universal principle of healing, renovation, and restoration. It symbolizes the change and awakening that is required to dismantle that which is artificial, false to fact, or conditioned within our natures, unquote. We might consider that the very opposite of misfortune. However, the bad news is that when the tower falls down, literally and or metaphorically, the tower falls down. When our internal and external structures crumble or collapse, it can be profoundly destabilizing. We may not have firm ground beneath our feet, literally or figuratively, and this is not an experience that many of us find particularly pleasant. But we can do ourselves a favor by recognizing that sometimes these kinds of experiences are profoundly necessary and they're profoundly human. As we go about living our lives and getting through all of the necessary business of surviving and endeavoring to thrive, we do the best we can. And, there are all kinds of external pressures to do things a certain way. And we may or may not have any connection with our internal guidance as we grow up and mature and make big choices in life. And so sometimes we bark up a few of the wrong trees, and sometimes we stay in those trees. Put differently, sometimes we build structures in our lives, both internal and external, that don't really serve us all that well, and that we kind of can't stay in forever or stay with forever. And there are lots of examples of what this can mean. So, for instance, religion is a structure that has both internal and external components. If we grow up participating in a particular religious tradition, that may shape our thinking about what it means to live a meaningful and worthwhile life. And that may impact many major life decisions, such as choices about how we live out our romantic lives. So, for instance, many people may grow up within religious communities that emphasize the importance of marriage and family. And they may absorb the idea that part of becoming a fully recognized adult, a full fledged member of the community, and living out the idealized human life course entails getting married, and perhaps getting married as soon as possible and having some kids and maybe doing that as soon as possible too. And of course, as we all may know, getting married or engaging in a committed relationship and building a family around that relationship can be a wonderful thing. But sometimes we build structures, major structures in our lives for reasons we aren't entirely clear on. Sometimes we do what's expected of us in life just because it's what's expected of us. And maybe that works out great for a while, or maybe even forever. There are plenty of people out there who love being married and having kids, even if they weren't entirely clear on why they chose to do those things when they made those decisions, or even if they did those things largely out of a sense that they were just expected to do them. But there are also times when we wake up one morning and go, my God, what have I done? Sometimes we have dramatic revelations that we have created structures in our lives that do not serve to support the person we have become or the person we're becoming. And sometimes we get a bunch of little messages that things as they are just aren't working for us. And as much as we might not want that to be true, those messages just keep on coming. And we may try to ignore those messages because making changes in our lives just seems so damn inconvenient, or perhaps even downright impossible. But rarely can we ignore our deepest truths forever. And when we ignore these little messages or these warning signs for a while, that is sometimes when the whole tower comes toppling down in dramatic fashion in one way or another. And, an example of this, again, this is one of my standard examples, but it's a good one here. Sometimes folks who are married or in a committed relationship and are having an affair with another person stay in paralysis for analysis for years. They say they want to make a decision and pick a direction and resolve their situation in some way. They don't want to stay in their current way of doing things any longer. But yet they don't want to choose and they avoid making choices. And, sometimes you can carry that out for quite some time and nobody finds out what you're up to and you're able to indulge your indecision. But sometimes, after 6 months or 6 years or whatever, however amount of time, the avoidance leads to something else happening. In your state of indecision, maybe you get discovered, maybe your affair becomes known about, or maybe, for instance, your affair partner becomes gravely ill and you can't go see them in the hospital and then they end up dying and you couldn't do the things that you wanted to do with them. Things like this can happen. And it's not to say that I don't want to say this in any sort of deterministic or scary way, but the point is that when we put things off that are important, there can be consequences. Now, I also want to be really clear that even when we're living our lives as consciously as we cannot necessarily prevent the kinds of experiences that the Tower card represents. And nor should we necessarily even try. To go back to the marriage example, sometimes we get married for reasons we are completely sure of, only to realize, at some point that the marriage is no longer a structure in our lives that suits who we currently are and want to become. And when this happens, it is not necessarily an indication that anything has gone wrong. So, for instance, this happens to a lot of us, right? We get married to someone of the other sex and we, think that's fine because it's what we're supposed to do. But we've always had this kind of, nagging attraction to people of our sex, but we haven't pursued it because we just never gave ourselves the chance because it wasn't what we were supposed to do or it wasn't an opportunity that we thought we had when we were younger. And then one day we just wake up after years of marriage and we're like, you know what? I really am attracted to men or women or people of whatever gender. But the point is, we wake up and we're like, wait a second, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. This is who I want to have sex with. This is who I want to be married to if I ever get married again. Right? And that's not an indication that anything has gone wrong. It's just an indication that we're better understanding who we are and what we want to experience in life. And that's great. But it can still be one hell of an experience to allow the structure of the current marriage to be dismantled or to fall apart or to disintegrate or to be consciously uncoupled, right? Sometimes the snake just has to shed its skin. Sometimes the hermit crab just has to ditch its own old shell and find a new home because it needs a bigger space to grow into. And sometimes we can grow in the ways that we need to grow by making relatively minor adjustments in our lives. But sometimes we need to tear down the whole structure or tear down all of the structures in our lives in order to give ourselves the opportunity to rebuild from scratch. And the great news is, once we allow the old structures to fall away, we can be free. Whatever is not truly a part of our nature is reduced to rubble when the tower falls down. Anything that isn't part of our authentic, essential self is destroyed when the tower crumbles. Through the destruction comes purification. Sometimes the only way to build something truly sustainable, something that's true for us, is to rip the current thing to shreds and rebuild. And this, of course, is the most liberating thing ever, except, the tower has to crumble for this liberation to occur. And that tower often equates with major parts of our lives, major elements of our internal and external structures, which we may have come to rely on to keep us supported and safe in quotation marks. And when this liberation is occurring in our lives, it may feel terrible, especially at first. Experiencing the transformation represented by the Tower card may lead to purification we are ultimately deeply grateful for. But when we're in the midst of it, when the tower is falling down, when we're sitting there amidst the rubble and we don't have a new house yet, literally or metaphorically, it may feel like bad shit is happening to us and it's terrible and our lives are coming to an end. And in a sense, our lives may be coming to an end. Major parts of our lives may be reaching a conclusion, and this may really freak us out. But it's also true that our lives are just beginning when the tower falls down. No matter how inconvenient or unfair or unjust the life upheaval we're going through may seem, we have the opportunity to recognize it as the opportunity that it is, which is to clear away the stuff that is false or doesn't fit you anymore and step into a way of living that is more true to who you currently are and more appropriate for you as you currently are. Now, I want to point out that sometimes the experiences represented by the Tower card are initiated somewhat voluntarily. For instance, if we choose to end a long-term relationship, We may be deliberately choosing to restructure our lives, but the experience of doing so may still be profoundly challenging while we're going through it. Even if we've chosen to do it, it may seem like really bad shit, even if we are intentionally pursuing change. Now, I just want to make it clear that change doesn't have to be hard or exclusively hard. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I do want to normalize the fact that change can be intensely challenging. Disruption and upheaval can be intensely painful. And by normalizing that, we have the opportunity to ride out uncomfortable experiences with a little more equanimity. When we know that even if something is difficult, it isn't necessarily bad, it can help us a lot. It's also important to point out that sometimes change is foisted upon us. Sometimes things literally fall out of the sky and hit us on the head. And sometimes life events seem to come out of nowhere to fall out of the sky and metaphorically hit us on the head and completely blindside us. And of course, there are many examples of this we could use, but in the context of romantic relationships, it may be that someone we love and have come to depend on decides that they don't want to be with us anymore. It may be that someone we trust does something that we don't like very much. Maybe they cheat on us. Maybe they gamble away our life savings. Maybe we find out they've been living a double life or have a secret family in parallel to the one we share with them. And all of this stuff happens. And when it does, especially if it happens suddenly and seemingly without warning, it may seem like the world is crumbling beneath our feet. And we might have preferred to remain blissfully ignorant and stick with the comfortable status quo. But sometimes we simply do not have the option to do this. Sometimes life delivers disasters or developments that certainly seem like disasters right to our doorsteps, and we can't always avoid them. We don't always have the option of retreating to our state of ignorance and maintaining the comfortable status quo. And when this is our state of affairs, we may feel profoundly aggrieved and put upon. We may feel justified in railing against whatever unpleasant development has befallen us. We may feel like we have every right to feel sorry for ourselves or be mad at the world or curse ourselves and the cosmos. And I want you to know that it's totally okay to feel that way. It's totally okay to be mad and to blame God or the universe or all the humans or one or more specific humans for whatever the developments are in your life that you don't like. It's okay to feel this way, but you probably don't want to feel this way forever. I believe we are all totally allowed to have a pity party for ourselves now and then. And in fact, I think that sometimes it's essential, right? But the question is, how long do we want that pity party to last? And if you want things to get better, you're going to have to cut the pity party off. And this is one of the reasons why it can be so helpful to remember that cycles of creation and destruction are part of the natural world and part of the human experience. Some moments in our lives may be times of building up structures and ways of being, and some moments in our lives may be seasons of dismantling. We may resist the idea of dismantling aspects of our lives, but doing so may be necessary for us to release parts of who we are that we have outlived, or that have served their purpose, and allow ourselves to grow into fuller, more expansive versions of who we are. When things happen to us that we find challenging or inconvenient or unfair, we always have the opportunity to ask ourselves why these things might be happening for us rather than why they're happening to us. And we may need to have a pity party first, and that's fine. But once we do that, we have the opportunity to start to think differently. And from there, to rebuild structures that are truly better for us after we've dealt with the destruction of the old. So, how can we survive the experience of events that are represented by the Tower card? Number one, we can have faith in the abstract that challenging times are not necessarily a sign that anything is wrong. We can choose to believe that upheaval is just as important a part of life as stability. I'll say that again for emphasis. We can choose to believe that upheaval and disruption are just as important a part of life or parts of life as stability is. We can choose to believe that sometimes disruption is necessary to break us out of stagnation or stasis. We can choose to trust that upheaval can be used as an opportunity for our evolution, for our purification, for our refinement. We can trust that disruption is an opportunity for us to release aspects of our lives and ourselves that are no longer serving us. Number 2, you can choose to learn how to take responsibility for what you have the power to control and how to develop a different relationship with the many things you do not have the power to control. Now, a lot of times when external circumstances in our lives seem to be quote unquote out of control, as they may actually be, we freak out and we dislike the uncertainty. And the way that we respond to that is by trying to control things that we absolutely can't. And, I think this is very human, but if you're in this kind of a situation, now is a really good time to learn how to distinguish between what you do have the power to control, which is a lot, and learn how to take responsibility for that rather than chasing your own tail and trying to work on things or work things out that really aren't up to you to decide. Number 3, we can choose to learn how to become more faithful to ourselves. Being faithful to ourselves can get us through a lot. But a lot of us have no idea what it even means to be faithful to ourselves. And of course, we can all be forgiven for that because no one teaches us what it might mean to be faithful to ourselves or how to practice, how to enact being faithful to ourselves. But even if it isn't our fault that we haven't learned how to do this yet in our lives, it's our opportunity, or maybe even our responsibility, to do that now. Because when we aren't faithful to ourselves, we usually end up, wait for it, creating structures and situations in our lives that don't really suit us. And then we end up creating our own towers that we're stuck in, and we wonder why we don't feel. The good news is I can teach you how to do all this stuff. I can teach you how to take more responsibility for the things you have the power to control and to recognize what you don't have control and to develop a different relationship to those things. I can teach you how to become more faithful to yourself and how to put that into practice every day of your life. And I can teach you how to ride out the discomfort of life upheavals in such a way that you ultimately show yourself how tremendously powerful you are, even if you're in a situation where you don't have control over everything. All right, everyone, that is it for today. If you would like help sorting through your infidelity situation, let's work together. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom so we can collaborate no matter where you're located. To get started, schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I can't wait to meet you. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have an amazing week. I'll talk to you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.